Duty, honor, country dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
The destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals.
Now, we are the masters of our fate.
Howdy, gents. Welcome back to another episode of the Wolf and Iron podcast. I'm your host, Mike Yarbrough, founder and curator of wolfandiron.com, and I'm so glad you're here. Guys, I really appreciate everybody who tunes in, everybody who listens to the podcast. We've had record downloads as of late, and things are just going on an upward trend. I'm really excited to see this. But I wanted to say, listen, if you're new, if you're just checking out the Wolf and Iron podcast for the first time, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss any episodes that come out. And I also wanted to let you know about our free Facebook group. We've got some just fantastic guys over there having some great conversations. One of the things that we don't do is we don't let everybody in. Not every guy that comes over and visits the Facebook group gets let in because we keep the caliber of men high over there. So when you head over to wolfandiron.com/thegroup, that's wolfandiron.com/thegroup, and that's how you get over to our Facebook group. You'll be presented with a couple of questions, and make sure you fill those out. If you want to be a part of this thing, if you want to be a part of a group of high-caliber men having some great conversations, talking about what it means to be a father, talking about what it means to be a husband, going through career changes, going through health issues, kid issues, all kinds of stuff, guys. Actually, I just put a question out there about I'm looking for a new a pistol to carry concealed, and I just got all kinds of great, actually probably more information than I wanted to, but just fantastic information from the guys out there about just different pistols to try out and stuff like that. So really just good manly conversations over there, guys. Once again, that's wolfandiron.com/thegroup. And today's podcast is a really good one. I think you guys are going to get a lot from this. It's an interesting conversation with Johnny Dzubak. He's one of the co-hosts of the Art of Charm podcast. And if you guys aren't familiar, the Art of Charm podcast talks all about social skills, having charisma, influence, persuasiveness, and all that kind of stuff. And they really specialize in helping people kind of overcome social anxiety and getting in the right mindset so that you're interacting with other people in the right kind of way, that you feel comfortable in the environments that you find yourself in. You're at work, you're at home, you've come into a new group of people for some reason, and maybe you've got a lead, maybe you've got to participate, whatever the case is, but you want to show up and be your best authentic self, and that's what they do over there. Johnny's got a really interesting background. He used to be a traveling rock and roll star, musician kind of guy. He talks about his transition over to the Art of Charm that takes place in the podcast, so I'm not going to cover all of that. But he's an interesting guy. There's some cursing in this episode because that's how Johnny rolls, and I didn't have the heart to tell him to stop, and I didn't actually think about it, but it didn't. It's totally fine. But just be aware, if you got kids in the car, you don't want them to hear the F-bomb or the S-bomb or any of the other bombs. Just save this one for later. But other than that, you guys are going to get a lot out of this as we kind of talk about things like cognitive distortion, how we view ourselves wrongly, how we view situations wrongly, just based on how our minds are kind of set up to negatively judge our environment and things that happen to us, and other things, guys. Deep waters here that we're going into, and a lot of different jumping off points here that I'm sure you guys can relate to. So without further ado, here's Johnny Dzubak. Mr. Johnny Dzubak from the Art of Charm, welcome to the Wolf and Iron podcast. It's great to have you here, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I've been listening to the Art of Charm for a little while now, and you guys always offer solid advice, helping guys just understand social context, to be more involved in everything from their influence, their charisma, their persuasive abilities, social skills, and all that kind of stuff. But for the guys who aren't familiar, either with you or with the Art of Charm, tell us about yourself and what you guys do over at the Art of Charm.
All right. So I guess I'll get rolling on that. So I got involved in self-development about 11 years ago. And it came at a time in my life, I'm 44 now. I'm 44 now, and then in my 20s, I had spent my 20s, and I spent most of my life, my childhood life, dreaming of playing music. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be on the road. I wanted to be a touring musician. I wanted to make records. I wanted to be a rock star. I was obsessed with music, and I'm guessing that came because my dad on the weekends played in the local bar band down the street. So there was always instruments at my house. Yeah. And, I wanted to take after my dad, and I just thought that was amazing. And then, of course, at a young age, MTV comes along, and now there's a visual to the noise that I was hearing. And with MTV, there was all this outlandish rock and roll look, and it was the 80s of the Sunset Strip. And, I heard that, I saw that, I had those instruments in my house, and I was doomed. So, and, so hook, line, and sinker. And I spent all of my 20s doing the best that I can do and getting with my best mates and creating rock and roll and just staying on the road as much as possible to try to make something of my life in the music industry. And when I started getting into my later 20s, the music industry started to crumble. And the writing was on the walls that it wasn't going to continue as it had for several decades beforehand. Yeah. And no one really knew what was going to happen. And by the time I hit 30, I saw the industry that I had grown up idolizing and wanting to be a part of crumble before my eyes. And realizing that there was no record deals and money, and it wasn't what it once was. And then, of course, for myself, I wanted to play like dirty, stripped down, bluesy rock and roll. And so, though that there was something of a music industry left, it certainly wasn't catering to what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't know what that was going to look like. And so as I needed to take a step back to rethink how I was going to go on with the rest of my life, considering that the one thing that I've always leaned on and looked towards was changing and crumbling. So I just needed to figure it out. And because I had spent so much time on the road and so much time wanting to be, Keith Richards and David Bowie and all this stuff, I decided that the best thing for me to do would be to take a step back and be reflective and try to figure out what the best step for me was to do. Yeah. And in order for me to do that, I needed to learn about who I truly was. Because up until that point, I was making a mad dash for everything that I knew for music. Yeah. There was no reflectiveness or self-discovery or learning about myself. It was, I'm a very obsessive person, and it was all about music, and that's all I cared about. And so I was full on pedal to the metal going in that direction. So when that all stopped, I realized that there was some self-discovery needed to be had in order to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Right. Because of my obsessive personality, I started getting into self-development, and I started implementing a few new ideas into my life and witnessed a ridiculous change in how I felt and how I went about the world. And I saw with implementing a few small ideas and seeing that change and how it made me feel. Yeah. It was enough for me to go obsessive about self-development. Like, wow, like, holy cow, my whole life's changed. The way I see things, the way I wake up every day is different. And so you hand me a few wins there and I'm going to go ape shit on that. And so I went from self-development and psychology and philosophy. Like, I couldn't get enough. And so then it's through absorbing as many books as I could to meeting as many people, because you have to also understand there wasn't a lot of people involved in self-development in the music industry, or at least in the way I wanted to see it. And even my music friends now think I'm weird. They're like, so I had to seek out other like-minded people. And then it was through that I had got involved in a small development company in DC, where I would go up on the weekends and help out on their weekend programs and meet other people and just be surrounded by like-minded people. And it was through that AJ and Jordan had started the podcast. It was called Pick Up Podcast at the time. And they were trying to take and discover different programs, because they had people writing to them about what programs they recommended and what they had found in their adventures that they were interested in. So in order to be able to answer those questions, they started reaching out and taking programs and reviewing them on the podcast. And it just so happens they ended up on a program that I was working on that weekend. I didn't know. I don't even know if I was really clear on what a podcast was at the time, let alone what an AJ and Jordan was. Right. And so, and we ended up having a blast that weekend. And I remember having drinks that night and AJ saying something to me in the effect of, if you had if you were able to create a self-development program from the bottom up, what would it look like for you? And we discussed that, and I shed some light on my ideas. And it was a few weeks later, he had asked me to move to New York and start the Art of Charm with Jordan. And at the time, I remember thinking, let me get this straight. Two guys that I don't know want me to move to a city I never lived in before, and we're going to start a business we don't even know what it's going to be.
That sounds awesome.
Sounds awesome. Exactly. And a lot of people are like, well, that is a decision that is crazy enough. How did you make that? And, for me, from that day and even to this point now, I don't think really hard about decision making. I don't believe that a lot of times I don't believe there's a right decision.
Yeah.
So for myself, there is no right or wrong decisions, only decisions you make right. And that takes a lot of pressure off of trying to make the right choice all the time, because a lot of times there isn't a right choice, and you can spend some people try to make that decision for years. I just don't, Kierkegaard talks a lot about decision making and options and time and pressure, and how that induces anxiety. And you can see it around everywhere you go now with the amount of choice everyone has. It's anxiety through the roof. I just hated indecision. So I thought that was the craziest thing that I could possibly think of doing at the time. So I was like, I'm all in, let's do this. And, I also decided that there's moments in everyone's life, and I believe that everyone has those moments, that opportunity will knock, and you'll either have the balls to accept it or you'll shy away from it.
Yeah.
And the people who take that opportunity, who have the balls, they're considered lucky. That's in air quotes.
Yeah.
And the other people who don't take those opportunities are hard luck people. And I'm sorry, I don't see it in that manner. I believe that everyone has those choices. Those opportunities knock, and you need to be aware of them, and you need to be willing to take them and make it happen. So that's where I was with that, and especially through all the self-development that I was doing. I mean, I was waiting for an opportunity like that. Like, let's roll.
Yeah, I think
so. Here we are.
Yeah, go ahead.
And here we are, 11 years later, and that's my journey up until this point. So yeah.
Well, that's awesome, and I think especially when we talk about making decisions, a lot of people would look at that decision of, should I move to New York with these guys that I don't know to start a business that I don't know how it's going to work, and they would say, well, that's crazy. really a lot of times when you're trying to make a decision, there's never enough information to make a good decision. I mean, I'm not saying there's never. There are many cases where there's not enough information at your disposal to truly make an educated decision. And in something like this, when there's this opportunity, there's potential, but you don't know how it's going to go. It could go like I'm sure many other people who've moved to New York in their lives and nothing came of it. Yeah. And I think that kind of some of that going with your gut has to be this question that you ask yourself, not necessarily is this a good decision or is this a bad decision, but is this a road that I'm one day going to wish that I had walked down? Or I'm going to look back on it and go, I should have done that. I wish I had done that. And I think you've got to go for it and just see where it leads. And I learned that decision process through music. And it's funny, I still carry my musician lens that I use for a lot of things. Now, in the 90s, there was this question that was getting proposed to everyone. If you're in a decent enough band to get some attention, do you go with the major label that has all the resources, but you'll be low man on a totem pole? Or do you go with the smaller label that has less resources, but you'll be high man on the totem pole? Okay? You'll be their number one priority. Now, to make that decision, you have about as enough information as you have of anything. And so for me, it was like, that's not a decision. You go with your gut and you make that decision the best decision you can. And the thing about that is, regardless of what happens, let's say you signed at a major and they go belly up. Yeah. Well, you're through that experience, you're going to learn a lot. I mean, you could sign to the minor label and they could go belly up. I mean, it's what is the work that you're willing to do once you get in there? That's the question. Yep. Absolutely. And so New York, it wasn't to me, the question really wasn't, do you move to New York? It's what are you willing to do once you get there? That's the question. Yeah. And I had to also realize that I didn't know jack shit about starting a business. I didn't know jack shit about anything, but I was open to learn, and I had to be willing to say, I don't know. I had to willingly go up there and be like, I don't know what I'm doing, but let's try, and it was like, well, listen, we're three intelligent guys. We'll figure this out, but everyone needs to be willing to make mistakes and willing to know that everyone on this team is going to make mistakes. But what's important here is what we learn from those mistakes. I mean, and shit, I mean, and that process is going to go on forever. So, yeah. And even in the process of going through that, you three guys kind of building a business, up in New York in a new place, right? There's the excitement there, but then there's also the pressure of like, we need money. We've got to have living expenses paid for and all this other kind of stuff. So this business needs to take off. It needs to happen. And, but you guys are kind of working out some of these social skills and stuff like that, especially I would imagine conflict resolution and whatever, kind of between yourselves as you're kind of navigating these waters as guys who don't know how to build a business, maybe don't know how to work together, navigate a new city and the stressors that kind of come along with that. So I'm just kind of envisioning that there's a kind of a learning ground that you guys have actually created for yourselves, at that time as well. Well, yeah, and a lot of people were like, oh, then you moved to New York and it was happily ever after. And absolutely not. I mean, there was squabbling and bickering and hard times and when you're trying to get things moving, sometimes you could feel like, well, maybe I'm the only one that's putting in 100 of the effort, or like there's a lot of that. And I think communication obviously is really important there. Yeah, I think part of what allowed us to be successful, or at least getting it moving, was, I think part of it was because we didn't know any better. Yeah. I mean, and this is why, sometimes decision making can get you in trouble if you overthink it, because all the pitfalls. I didn't know anything. I was like, well, we're going to start this business. And it was funny because
I didn't know how many doors I was going to have to knock on to get laughed out of the room, and had I known that before I went up there, like, maybe I wouldn't have done it. Like, it was
sure.
So we go up there, I get laughed out of the room, and my reaction is not why am I bothering? It's what's wrong with that guy? Doesn't he know a good idea when he hears one? Like, that's how, like, brash, and part of that is a bit brash, it's a bit arrogant, it's a bit ignorant, but most importantly, out of all those traits, it's willingness to laugh at ourselves and willingness to like get laughed out of the room, like laugh out, like, what do I know? Like, I tried, like, and I think I always say that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, man, you got to be able to laugh at yourself, because you're going to take a beating, and you're going to get laughed out out of a lot of rooms, and you got to be willing to laugh it up, and because that slowly just starts chipping away at your soul. And I live out here in LA now. You see my actor friends just getting fucking slayed, and it's like, it's difficult. How many times can you get laughed out of a room before you start to think, what the fuck am I doing? So that idea, whatever it might be, needs to be one that you're willing to get laughed out of the room for. You got to be willing to fight for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to move on to some of the issues with social skills and things of that nature, and because this is really where you guys kind of this is where the money is for you guys. This is where in terms of this is what and what Art of Charm is all about. And as I'm kind of thinking about social skills and the people who normally have issues with them, I think about introverts. That's the first people that come to mind. But then I think, well, I'm an introvert. So when we talk about social skills, are these things that are, solely on the introvert kind of side of the house, the people who, maybe they're shy, maybe they're introverted, whatever the case is, or is it, are these things that everybody has to kind of issues that everybody has to learn about, deal with, and that kind of stuff, regardless of whether they're introverted or extroverted, what have you?
I think that everyone has to learn them, and so you have to also, when you look at any sort of issues that you might have and being a human being and moving forward, you got to look at all of the external forces. So, for one, just you're going to be genetically predispositioned for certain things, certain temperaments, but you also have to look at societal pressures and factors. You also have to look at development issues, pressures, and factors. How were you raised, right? So if you were raised by very outgoing parents, then perhaps you've learned these skills earlier in life than someone who grew up in an introverted, academic-focused family.
Yeah.
If you're a family and you growing up focused on academics, then it's a probably good guess that you weren't out going to the dances and all those things.
Right.
If you had a family that was focused on athletics, right, then so sure there was a lot of value given to you at an early age that allowed you to feel good in those moments. But what did you do after that?
Yeah.
When if you didn't go into Division 1A or the pro, like then you have to deal with those shortcomings at that point. I grew up in my dad was a bit detached, but I was always encouraged for my hobbies, so music and skateboarding, and I was pretty much left alone. And some things I learned, picked up, and did well with, and other things I didn't. And so, and I will also say for myself, I just got this question the other day. I was doing we have a program which is called Core Confidence, and it's a group thing. It meets once a week, but I was doing a Q&A with the guys there, and someone mentioned, you played in bands and you were really outgoing, so was this ever a problem for you? And as I mentioned earlier, yeah, when the music industry dried up and I realized that I wasn't going to be able to continue life in the music industry, Right? Because at that time, going out for me was, I'm Keith Richards, I'm Johnny Thunders, right? I'm going to go out, I'm going to get hammered, I'm going to flirt with, that just goes with territory. But once I had to do work on myself and be reflective and realize that sort of behavior is not going to roll that well. It's cute when you're 25. It doesn't, when as you're getting older, like, skills and things need to be adopted and changed up. And when I was going out and learning about myself and wanting to be better and getting into self-development, I had to, first of all, admit that I didn't really have any social skills. I was just pretending to play rockstar, and that's what got me through.
Yeah.
Now that I wasn't doing that, one of the questions I had to ask and answer for myself was, can I go out to a social engagement and build value for myself from scratch?
Wow, yeah.
Because in the past, I relied on talking about going on the next tour or making that next record, so I was leaning on those sorts of things, and then had to realize that I was leaning on those things, and that wasn't me being a high value person. And then so now it's, can I go out into a social environment and meet people and put myself out there and build value from scratch by being a high value guy.
Yeah.
And that was difficult. That needed to be learned. I'm still learning that. I'm getting better at it every day. It's going to be something that I will always look to get better at for the rest of my life. It's self-development. And so, but that was a terrifying moment for me, to realize that everything that I know and all the value that I've held for myself and the confidence that I did have could easily be taken away if I left that rock and roll environment. And
yeah, no, I'm hearing that, and I'm sort of imagining the facade of Johnny Rockstar, and in one sense it's a facade, but in one sense that's kind of who you're trying to become. So there's an aspect of that even for guys who are more shy or more introverted, whatever the case may be, there's an aspect where they need to be able to put on the man that they want to become, as sort of let me try it out, let me get used to this guy. But at the same time, you can't lose the trueness of who you are. And as you're kind of talking about that transition that you had from sort of Johnny Rockstar to, the real John Dzubak, guy who everybody likes, not just the ladies or, whoever's there hearing music. There's a certain vulnerability that you got to have to discover who you are and be authentic about that. And then also be a willingness to put that on, to put that on display and say, hey, I'm not on stage. I'm not here to excite you guys. I'm here to give value to you. And give me an idea what, I'm just seeing vulnerability as being like a big key component to this social skills and even just making that transition for yourself into who you are today.
Yeah. First of all, I think it starts with admitting that as a human being, you're flawed, right? This is Schopenhauer. This is Nietzsche. We got work to do.
Yeah.
And,
right.
And for a lot of people, that first step is incredibly difficult to admit. And let me give you an example of this. This is the kind of shit that blows my mind. I was in an Uber a few weeks ago, and the Uber driver asked me what I did. It was just the usual small talk. And I mentioned about the podcast, and he wasn't really all that familiar. He's like, oh, he thought it was like a comedy thing. And I was trying to explain it to him. And I was like, yeah, it's self-development. I'm really into that stuff. And he goes, oh, self-development. Yeah, that's really good, because some people really need that. Now, this is the kind of shit that drives me crazy, because it's not some people need that. It's everybody needs self-development. Everybody should be bettering themselves, because we're not turtles, right? You don't get born as a turtle and start doing turtle shit, right? Like you as a turtle, you're programmed. You come out, you go to the ocean, you start doing turtle stuff.
Yeah.
As a human being, there is over a decade of onboarding for you just to fucking just move into the world on your own.
Yeah.
And so obviously you can't learn everything that it's going to take. And so you owe it to yourself to get better, to educate yourself, to, like if we didn't need self-development, there wouldn't be college, right? Like, so we wouldn't have this thirst for knowledge. And so it starts with admitting I don't know everything. I got a lot of work to do and I'm willing to make a fool of myself. And it means I can be better. And when it comes to making a fool of yourself, that's going to happen whether you want it to or not. And so I would suggest developing a sense of humor about it because the hits are coming.
Yeah.
And they're going to keep coming.
Yeah. I think you kind of mentioned that this sort of happened for you in your 30s, partly because the music industry started to change. And, I'm really thankful for one that you didn't get into like trap music or dubstep and just, go that route. 'Cause that would have been a total loss,
Thank you.
But,
I couldn't have done it if I tried, but yeah.
But in any case, I see a lot of guys kind of coming to this point in their life. It happened for me as well when I was about 30 years old, where I really began to kind of see myself as sort of objectify myself in a way that I could sort of say, here I am as a human amongst other humans. And you've kind of mentioned this as well. And just to kind of give the guys who are listening sort of a concept of why does this happen around our 30s? Is it a self-development thing? A lot of it actually has to do with our biology. Our brains don't actually mature until about the ages of 24 to 27.
Yeah.
And so until that point, we're just kind of like, we understand that we have responsibilities, but we don't really know why. What we do matters in the larger picture. And when we hit that 30-year-old age, usually our brains have kind of got to a place where we understand, oh, I'm a person amongst other people, and I have responsibilities in how I interact with them.
I absolutely wholeheartedly agree, and I think there was another aspect for me, which was that as a rock and roll musician, I was on a timetable, and so when you grow up as somebody who loves, just obsessed with rock and roll. You have the 27 Club idea, which is all those artists who had passed away, Hendrix and Morrison and Janis Joplin and Kurt Cobain and all that. And then, so that's sort of in the back of your mind that you hope that you don't fuck up to the point where you choke on your own vomit, right? Because there's this idea of this crazy rock and roll party maniac. Because when you're 16 years old, that dude rules. Like you want to be Jim Morrison, right? And at least for me, I wanted to be Hendrix. And then I got older and my heroes became even more fucked up, like Johnny Thunders. And it just gets crazier. But so that was in my mind. And then by the time I started getting into my late 20s and hitting 27, 28, 29, couple things. I was able to, I've toured countries and I made little records and did some stuff, but it wasn't like a 1970s David Bowie playing the fucking, it wasn't this romanticized idea of rock and roll excessive success that I had dreamed about as a kid. And you have to take a step back. And then with my band started falling apart. And so now I'm like, I'm getting to this age, the band's falling apart. There wasn't the wild romanticized success that I was hoping for. And so it's like, okay, well, it's time to take, and then the music industry crumbling. It's time to take stock of what the hell's going on.
Yeah. And
in order to take stock properly, or at least through an objective lens, I needed to take a step back. And as I said, it was, if you're going to do that, you got to learn about yourself first, so you understand why you see the world in the way that you do.
Yeah.
because that's a lens that you put together through experience, and you need to understand why that lens has gotten you into trouble. And and then you have to realize, you have to admit that you're not at a place where you want. You have to realize, and you have to start taking accountability for the decisions that got you there. I could have said, well, the music industry sucks now and people don't like rock and roll. And it's like, there was no way that I was going to point the finger. My dad would have never let me have gotten away with something like that as a kid. So I certainly wasn't going to allow myself to get away with pointing the finger as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as you're kind of talking, just sort of telling that story there, it's kind of reminded me of this topic that I know you like to talk about. That's cognitive distortion. It's the, how we see ourselves, and how we think we see ourselves really are in the world versus how we really are, or other people are versus how they really are. You can probably do a better job of describing that than I can, because I think that there's a lot of things that you've touched on just in that, the challenges of growing up with a certain mindset and then seeing that sort of say, oh no, that's not going to work out. I've got to make a decision to change. And I just see cognitive distortion all in that, realm of just of life and transition and how that plays out. So I want to talk about that, but first, give us an idea of like what cognitive distortion is, maybe what that looks like.
There's multiple ways of looking at cognitive distortions. Certainly, seeing yourself distorted from what the reality is one thing, but it's first of all, it starts with thought patterns, and they're flawed thought patterns that allow you to hold together a narrative that allows you to be comfortable. And once you put a narrative together that allows you to be comfortable, then the cognitive distortion then goes to you sitting in that narrative so that you are okay with where you're at. Yeah. So we have to rewind to the flawed thought patterns that allow you to be content in a bad position. And that can be easily summed up through an easy experiment. Okay. So I always say that, imagine this, you're a young man, you're walking down the street, and maybe when you woke up that morning, you felt yourself coming down with being sick, you're all stuffed up and you're feeling a little bit exhausted. Yeah. And maybe you had a shitty day at work the day before where your boss chewed you out for fucking something out. So you're not all feeling all that great. Now you're walking down the street. We do this stuff all the time. And you're walking down the street, you pass 3 random girls and they just start laughing. Now, for most of us, it's easy to be self-conscious of what just happened and think, oh my God, they're laughing at me. Yeah. Is my zipper up? Is my shirt okay? Like, you're just going through all this checklist because, right, as a straight man, you want the adulation of those girls. You want them to like you. And when they start laughing, you're like, oh shit. So, and if you're intelligent and critical, and being critical of yourself comes with intelligence, it's easy to be critical about yourself in that moment and go, they're laughing at me, something's up.
Yeah, right. Yep.
And now, because of that, what happens to your emotions take a dive because you're now just great. Now girls are laughing at me. Mm-hmm. I just got chewed out of work. I'm getting sick. And my body language, so that takes a slide to match my emotions. And so imagine now I'm going to meet my buddies to have a beer and watch the game. So bad body language. I'm down in the dumps. Hey guys, go get a beer. And my buddies are fired up about the game. They're like, get this fucking guy out of here. We're trying to get excited here. I don't need this shit. Yeah. And then of course, what happens if any girl looks my direction while I'm at the bar in that state? I'm going to think of this, oh, she's probably making fun of me too. Or it's just a never ending cascade of bullshit that you've opened yourself up to. And there's a we had done a podcast on the 10 most common cognitive distortions. So you can see how these come in all sorts of different ways.
Okay.
Now, I can ask myself, first of all, do I have any evidence or data that supports the claim that those girls were laughing at me? Well, no, not really. It was a thought. Okay, well, a thought's not a fact. Could there be another reason why they were laughing at me? Or could there be another reason why they were laughing in that moment? Yeah. Sure, whatever. Am I being so self-centered to think that their actions have to do with me? Because what do I have to evaluate the world around me? Just my senses. So that puts me in the middle of everything. Yeah, but that's presumptuous to think that their laughing has to do with me. So now, after logically answering those questions, I can't logically hold that idea, and you build that narrative that those girls were laughing at me, which then goes on to affect my afternoon hanging out with the guys and how I'm feeling, hanging out at the bar. Mm-hmm. And if you open yourself up to these types of thoughts, you have to understand that you are building pathways. You are building pathways that turn into habits that allow you to keep doing that very thing. So now, when these type of things happen, you're already programmed to take the shitty thought and do it again and do it over. And so let's just say that habit then turns into a pattern, then turns into just your behaviors and actions. So you could be doing that sort of thing to yourself for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. How do you get yourself out of that mess once you realize the damage you have already caused from not challenging these thoughts earlier?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking like the guys that have done this. I mean, they've just laid down just an entire network of self-pity, self-rejection, defeatist mindset, right? That they're basically wired up to think negative thoughts that's the quickest thought they're going to have is something negative, either about themselves or about somebody else or about how somebody thinks about them. And so as you're going to say, how do you get out of that? Like, how do you overcome those?
Well, to even go along a little farther, because when people hear this, their first thought was, yeah, but I'd only fall for that some of the time, not all the time. All right, I'm not so bad. Okay, well, let's start thinking percentages. 30% of the time would you fall for that? 40% of the time would you fall for that? How about 50% of the time would you fall for that? Yeah. I mean, when we start looking at it with these numbers, right, you start to, do you really want to give 70% effort to your well-being? So, and you have to also realize that decision-making of how you're interpreting that event, 3 girls laughing at you as you pass them walking down the street, right? That event is happening to you all the time.
Exactly.
So that's just the one instance that you are now aware of, that you're taking the shitty one. How many times do you have a decision to make about what just happened on an everyday basis that you're not conscious of? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And did you make the right decision? Did you work through that? So then once you realize that, then you have to open yourself up to, as a human being, you're susceptible to all sorts of influence if you're not conscious of it. And so then when you get older, right, and you understand this, you start to be very careful of what you'll subject yourself to, so you're not dealing with toxicity and bad behaviors and don't even get me fucking started on social media. Like, if I didn't need Facebook as a way to track clients and what people are doing in my life, I would get rid of it, because it is a factory of sadness and fucking toxicity.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're kind of talking, the guys are thinking about who are listening to this, and they're thinking, okay, so I've got to basically capture my thoughts as my thoughts are happening. So that's one thing that needs to happen, right? And as the guys are getting older, as we've kind of talked about, you've got the mature brain. You should be able to do that. You should be able to say, in this moment, I'm feeling myself getting heated by a simple conversation. Well, why is that happening? Or I feel myself feeling down by the way this person responded to me. Why? Right? So there's one aspect. I think another thing that guys can do that I found helpful is to do almost like a head to toe. What are you feeling right now type of thing. If somebody, if you're one of those guys, you're listening to this and you just deal with low self-esteem, low self-worth, self-pity, rejection, those kinds of things, and you kind of recognize that about yourself, do these kind of checks throughout the day and say, okay, head to toe, what are you feeling? Well, I feel something in my gut. Well, what's your gut telling you? I feel it's kind of aching. Well, work that feeling to see where that travels back to. Is it an interaction that you had? Is it a thought that you had? Did you begin feeling that way after something occurred or when somebody said something? And then that's when you begin to kind of pick that apart a little bit. You begin to say, okay, just the same thing you had. Do I have any objective, verifiable reason to feel the way I feel about what somebody said or when I saw those girls laughing or whatever the case may be? And a lot of this has to do with just getting in touch with what your thoughts are telling you, what your body's telling you, becoming self-aware. I mean, that's a big part of self-development. And so it's just what are your thoughts on that? I mean, just as far as just becoming more aware of your thoughts and your body and how you're responding in the moment.
Before I get in there, let me lay out one more idea that will help with this.
Okay.
So you mentioned about the guy who knows he's making bad decisions about himself and has low self-esteem.
Yeah.
Right? We know those guys. Those are the guys who are open to get into self-development. And some of them are able to work themselves out of it. Some of them just feel defeated and give up. However, there's the other guy, and this is the more common, is the guy who doesn't realize these decisions and actions and how they've fucked with him.
Okay.
Because he has a decent sense of self-esteem. So, for instance, I have a buddy. I have two sets of friends. It's really weird. I have my rock and roll LA music friends who think I'm weird with self-development and don't want any part of it because obviously they're scared that they might be broken, right? And then I have, it's so weird. And then I have my self-development friends who are super up on this stuff and super, who understand this. Now, I went to Europe a couple years ago with my rock and roll buddy, and we were going to go see some European tour, festivals and do some European rock and roll dive bar drinking. It was like the ultimate 3 weeks of rock and roll, traveling across Europe, seeing bands and having fun. Now, a few of those nights, he started poking around in self-development and started to ask me questions about it. And once I started laying out arguments for why he would benefit from self-development, because it was always, what do these guys like to come to you? I'm like, they're fucking, some are low self-esteem guys that need a lot of help. Some are CEOs who know they can be better. It runs the gamut, right? So he's poking, he's trying to figure it out. And I started, basically, I showed him on a timeline thoughts and that have caused decisions that he had made, which caused certain results. And when I went from the results to the decisions to the thoughts that influenced that decision, he started freaking out. Right? He just started losing his shit. He shut down the conversation because to go down that road, he has to admit that his narrative that he had built for himself and how things work and his place in it is wrong. Mm. Now, once we pull that sweater thread, he has to be willing and open that other ideas and narratives that he holds about the world and himself are wrong. Yep. And if you've ever experienced watching somebody whose walls of reality start crumbling or down around them, that's a scary experience. Yeah. And considering where you are and how you understand this stuff, I'm going to guess you've had that happen for yourself. Yes. I remember when it happened, and I remember when it happened for me. And so it was, once I realized that there was things that I believed that were not true that had been fucking me over, I was like, well, if that's the case, I'm blowing open every idea, every narrative, every thought that I have. Because if I'm wrong about something, I want to know it now. And I started scrutinizing everything. And and so that I can reconfigure and build a narrative that would allow me to be more successful and more happy. Now, so there's those two types of people that we just mentioned.
Yeah.
Now, as we were talking about working through this, you have to be willing to admit that you're wrong, and you have to be willing to hear arguments of why you're wrong, and you have to be willing to scrutinize everything. Now, there's pluses and minuses to everything. So now that I have this ear and eye and mind that scrutinizes everything, you can imagine how my regular relationships go when someone tells me something and I go, well, what is the proof that you have that backs up that idea? Like you can imagine how my ex-girlfriends have felt about me when I've scrutinized and challenged ideas that they flippantly had just said. And I was like, well, that's cute. Where'd you get that? Right? What evidence do you have to back it up? It's like, that doesn't go over very well. And neither does it go over very well with your, I call them normies, right? With your normie friends as well. Because I'm just like, you're an asshole. Why are you trying to rain on my parade? It's like, well, you can continue living in fantasy land, or you can get real so you can make decisions that are going to affect your life in the positive, rather than you creating this bubble, this fantasy land that you're in, trying to make yourself comfortable where you're at through whatever rationalizations you could come up with. And I was that person. And I'm so happy that I am out of that. But it takes work, and you have to be willing to do the work. And it is not something that you're just going to flip a switch on and all of a sudden be better the next day. It is work that you're going to have to continue doing of breaking old habits and now building new habits, rather than taking the shitty narrative right out of the gate and building and walking through that. It is now, I have a thought. Now I'm going to challenge that thought. And now I'm going to build a narrative that is based on the data and evidence that I have and that allow me to be happy. And that takes work. And then it starts to become this thing where how you do anything is how you do everything. So if I want to get better at calling myself out for these random thoughts that I have, so I don't take the shitty narrative, right? I have to also be willing to do that work, but I have to also be willing to get up in the morning and go to the gym, because it starts at a very basic function of every decision that you make. And so there's a whole world that has to change. But I think for the most part, people freak out that so many things have to change at once. They don't. It's a day-to-day process, one thing at a time. We're moving into the better. And this is why you have to admit, hey, this is something I'm working on. I'm getting better at it, but it's in the pipeline. Like, and if you can look at it as with patience, that every day you're going to be a little bit better than the day before if you bring these things to a conscious level and work on them. And then you can go to bed that evening putting a check mark, like I did that. And then that allows you to be excited to try to do it better the next day. And then this is the kind of thing that in my rock and roll bullshit narrative that I had, like I used to think that I was a night bird, somebody who was best working at night and had the best ideas at night. And I hated mornings. I wasn't a morning person. That's all. That wasn't the case at all. It was just because I didn't have anything worth waking up to. And the minute I did is the minute that I'm at the fucking gym at 6 a.m. getting my ass kicked for this half marathon that I'm about to do. Like your whole world changes. And of course my rock and roll friends think I'm literally, I think at this point, probably think I'm insane.
Yeah.
But that's okay. That just comes with the territory. But so for the normal person to get involved, when they look at the grand picture, I think it seems daunting and it's easy to get frustrated. So developing a high value character within yourself allows you the right perspective to see the progress reward yourself every evening, and know that you're getting better. And that starts from inside.
So as I'm thinking about how you've got these kind of two sets of friends, right? I mean, I would imagine you've got the rock and roll guys that you've already talked about. I'm sure you've got followers and people who are fans of Art of Charm and would really be into what you do, right? In terms of self-development and all of that. How do you fight the, sort of still being in the rock and roll world mindset, right? But without fully embracing that and going down that road, and but then also this sort of the dichotomy of I'm a self-development guy, but I'm also a rock and roll guy. I mean, I feel like there's going to be some challenges just in balancing that.
There absolutely is. Luckily, for the rock and roll part of me, I have done all the drugs and all the drinking and all the partying that I could live on for the rest of my fucking life. Granted, it's not to say I don't like doing those things. That's the hedonist in all of us.
Sure.
But after a certain age, there's a cost analysis to every decision that I make.
Yeah.
So if I go out and I drink more than my fair share of Maker's Mark, I know I won't be at the gym tomorrow, and that's a chain that I break, and I have to start all over again. So I want to be. So there is a balance of being honest with myself, but also being able to do both of those things. I sacrifice. Nowadays, Art of Charm is my main priority. It always has been since I got involved in it.
Yeah.
Yet I've been in bands this whole time, from New York to Los Angeles, and some that have done fairly well, gathering some audiences and having a lot of fun. But those things now, they've had their opportunity. I've had that opportunity, and that's Art of Charm is my focus. And the other thing is, when I was in doing the rock and roll thing, when I look back at it, I was a lot of times miserable.
Yeah.
How am I going to make this work? How was I going to pay rent? Oh no, I'm hammered again on this bender. And I guess as you get older, you're able to look back at those things and think, I don't ever want to go back there.
Yeah.
And you can benefit from that a little bit when you're 23 years old and you're trying to make a name for yourself and be notorious and crazy, and you're building a name. But that sort of thing doesn't work so well after a while. And the other thing about it is, when you're young, you don't have much traction and really anything going on. So you're just throwing shit at the wall, hoping something sticks and starts to move.
Yeah.
And what had happened is, once I got involved in self-development, I implemented a few of these new ideas and saw my life instantly start taking traction.
Yeah.
And things changing and feeling better. And it's just like, you can't go back to that lifestyle once you're out of it.
So just kind of wrapping this up here. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I think each of these has been a challenge for me, because everything we touch on is, there's like a next level and a next level and a next level to keep going down, and we could keep talking about these things, for the rest of the day, I imagine. And that's obviously why the Art of Charm podcast exists, and that's what you guys talk about, so those things can be explored. But I want to talk about the last question here, and that is, what does it mean to you as a man to do what you do now with the Art of Charm and help people thrive in the areas that they used to feel very insecure about, social skills and things of that nature, and especially as compared to, music has its place. I mean, music touches people's lives. Music moves people. It's tremendously powerful. So I don't want to downgrade that, but I do think that there's something, maybe more specific, more pointed about what you're doing now in terms of helping people to grow in the areas that they just feel like they couldn't get past. So what are your thoughts on that? Just how does that impact you as a man?
I just want to make sure that I have the question correctly. You're asking me how do I feel about the impact AOC has had on people's lives?
Yeah, and your role in doing that, how's that sit with you?
Okay, so when I started to see some change in my life, and then had the opportunity to help others with it, and I found I had a knack for it, and I felt really good. It was at that time that I realized that if I can help anyone avoid any of the pitfalls that I had went on, then I would love for that to happen. And then, of course, with the Art of Charm, it gave me a louder megaphone to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I'm still obsessed with self-development, as I have been from day one. And so I'm thrilled to death that I have this opportunity to be able to go down these roads. And when I do Facebook Lives or I'm on the podcast, when we get letters back of how these ideas have changed people's lives, I mean, this is what fuels me to want to get better at it. This is what fuels me to dive into a new philosopher that I know I'm going to be stuck on for a few weeks and drive myself crazy. Like I can't just let's say just appreciative and thankful more than anything that I have this opportunity. And of course, with that, I want to be able to do it to the best of my ability. Because, this is a shot that I've worked for, and I'm happy that I'm here, but I want to make sure that I'm delivering the best message as possible.
Yeah. Well said. That's good. Well, sir, this has been a great conversation. I look forward to hearing guys' feedback from this. And guys, if you're listening to this, just head over to wolfandIron.com/Art of Charm. That'll actually take you to this episode. And you can see all the show notes there. You can see how to get in touch with Johnny, more information on the Art of Charm, any resources that we've talked about. I know there's been a couple of different links and things that we've talked about, and you can catch all that over there. And look, Johnny, I appreciate this conversation. It's great to just talk to you and just dive into some of these things, man. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for having me. This has been rad.
Well, there you have it, men. I'd love to know what you thought about the episode. Feel free to reach out to me on any of my social media networks. And look, if you got something out of this, make sure another guy does too. Share the episode and make sure it gets in front of the guys that need to hear it the most. Until next time, keep your powder dry, and may a fair wind be always in your sails.